Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join the session today, and thank you, Ragini Anand, for coming on for our second introductory series on the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabarata and is found in the 11th chapter of the Indian epic. In this session today, Ragini Anand is going to take us through her perspective on the history and the relevance of the Bhagavad Gita in today's time. So over to you, Ragini Anand. Thank you for taking the time to join today.
Yes, thank you, Carl. Can I just check that we are all able to hear me? Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Excellent. Well, let me wish you Happy New Year, fellow seekers and listeners. It's the start of another year, 2021, and I wish you all a great start to this year. And what better way to start the year than to be listening to a series on Mahabarata or Bhagavad Gita on this journey of seeking that I think the planets of our time has forced us to go inwards and start looking for solutions to everyday problems that we find ourselves in. So thank you, first of all, for being here. Just a quick kind of background. I don't know how many of you were here in the last session. I don't recognize the name, so I'm assuming that many of you will be new. And I'm just going to give you a quick background from where I've kind of started my seeking journey. Now, I have lived in between two cultures all my life, having lived in the West and married into the Western community, but being very much having my roots in the East. So I have this very fortunate position of being able to see both worlds from the inside out and from outside in. So first of all, I thank my lucky stars for giving me that opportunity, because it allows me to remain open to different worlds, different thoughts, different ideas, different ideologies, different political systems, different histories. And in this journey, I've also given a birth to a daughter who's been sent to school and has participated in the learning that is commonplace for all of us. You know, we have a limited body of knowledge from which we are trained or conditioned or able to have access to in our schooling years. One of the things that I have noticed as I've got older is this noticing of the exclusion of the sort of Eastern philosophies, especially of the exclusion of something as enormous as the Mahabharata. Clear to me when I was relating with either individuals, these could be, you know, big senior executives in companies, or they could be, you know, things that I read in the media, or whether I was studying one of my 3 degrees or watching my daughter go through the university programs here, whether it was political thought or corporate thought, there was a big kind of elephant in the room. And that elephant, I would like to say, is that I started noticing the exclusion of the Vedic culture. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I believe in if there is an exclusion, then I feel like I want to actually chase that exclusion even more. It's a bit like if there are 2 identical toys that you give a child and one is moving and the other one is right under their nose, they're going to go after the moving object, aren't they? So in the same way, I noticed that exclusion and it turned me. towards, reading even more of the Vedic culture and getting immersed in it. But I had to do that privately, and having been excluded from it from these other sources that I spoke of. And in so doing, I realized that it was absolutely an enormous body of work. So why the Mahabharata, first of all? Now, Mahabharata is really it spans, if you like, from the encompassing all the human nature, okay, that we all I'm sure come across in our lives, all the different elements of human nature that you can attribute as being base or divine. So the Mahabharata, being a longest poem that has ever been written, of 200,000 stanzas, reveals all the various human nature characters from basal to divine. So it talks about stories which are not only horizontal in geography, but also vertical in cosmology. So what I found was that it was so incredibly deep in the study of human nature that it just grasped me. It grasped me so intensely that I couldn't put it down. Not only did I read it, but I also watched it. And I tried to look at each character individually and study their human kind of nature, and decided what it was in their nature that attributed to this great war that we found our history depicting. Mahabharata is known as one of the greatest wars that was ever spoken about. Now, Mahabharata originally, some claim it's 2000 years BC, but nobody is able to come to any kind of agreement to that yet. Let's say it's around 1000 to 2000 years BC. One could say that it was an actual war fought in Bharat, in India. India was known as Bharata in those days, and it comprised of some 54 nations, I believe, which had this one emperor. So it was a big span, if you like, as an empire. And really, prior to this one king that finds himself not able to give up his love for his son, and even though he's not really merited to sit on the throne, insists that he sits on the throne, and the troubles then begin from there on. Bharata, before that time, was a soft power. It was a power that didn't believe in actually going and claiming lands as such. It was really always posed to be a soft power rather than a hard power using weapons to, go and take over the world or take over territory. So the whole story is really talking about how difficulties start in life and you move from being a soft power to a hard power. Hard power using weapons and law and warfare and legal systems to win over territories, to a soft power that does it through inspiration. Now, soft power is always seen as a higher level of thinking than hard power. And I think we would all agree that to use a weapon, to use a gun to convert somebody or to terrorize somebody is far easier than to convert somebody through inspiration, talk, dialogue, convincing, unifying methodologies rather than dividing methodologies. Now, that is exactly where I became very interested in studying Mahabharata even more deeply than I first started, because it was really depicting at so many levels, whether it's an internal level or an external level, whether we're looking at sort of physiological levels, psychological levels, spiritual levels, there was something in these stories that made sense. I have, since watching the I think they're the 90 or so episodes by I think it's Sharma, I forget the name. I've watched it such a long time ago. Series of very well produced and quite old series of Mahabharata. Must have watched it twice. And I remember being absolutely glued to it, even though I don't speak Hindi. And I learned Hindi as I watched these episodes. I was so inspired by it. And what I find in the Mahabharata is that it's the biggest study of strategy. It's about, if you want to see how strategy can be won, then whether you're in the corporate world, whether you're in the political world, any world that you may find yourself in, you will learn strategies for life that will take you towards either completion or incompletion. Incompletions are shown through the baddies, the Kauravas. What happens when you basically are incomplete? What do I mean by incomplete? When you allow yourself to be driven by jealousy or lust or anger or irritation or fear, those will lead you to incompletions. Are driven more by inspiration and contribution and doing your duty without attachment, you will always be complete, and you will find your way to a blissful life. Now, all the characters, as I said, all the human nature is some way depicted in Mahabharata. So if you take the sort of the main characters, Dhritarashtra, who is the blind king, who is physically blind, but is also an allegory of being spiritually blind. He then gives birth to greatest war that humanity has witnessed. So he represents in some way greed and fear and possession. Those are the qualities that he represents. You also have characters such as Bhishma, who really represents, he's a person who respects at all costs the social norms and requirements of society and conditioning, and he will not sway from that in almost is almost hell-bent to respect social norms. Then you have characters, the main characters such as Arjuna in the story, who he has so much discrimination power, but he has speed with it, so he can think in the most heated situations with discrimination that we would all love to emulate. We all know what we are like when something outside us pushes buttons to, make us react. We don't have any time to respond. We don't. Arjuna is not like that. He has speed with discrimination. It's a wonderful quality to emulate. And to study him deeply is to study the art of responding in every moment in life rather than reacting. Reacting will always create more karma, okay? Because you're on autopilot. It's almost like unconscious thinking. Arjuna is always conscious in every thought, every moment. He will never take a step wrong. So wonderful character to emulate. You then have, characters such as Yudhishthir, who is the holder of dharma. What is dharma? We will talk about that in the next session. But he is the bastion of doing the right thing. He's the bastion of truth that cannot be contested at any level. It's above and over duality as a nature of black and white, good and bad. Dharma goes beyond that. What is right for the whole, not just the whole on the earth plane, but the whole of the cosmos, integrating yourself to nature's laws would be the way I would see dharma. Then you've got people like Bhima, who is speed but without discrimination. He acts, he's like a force. He will just act without thinking, but that force is often needed in certain situations, so he emulates that. One of the 5 Pandavas, Nakula, is a silent action. He's a silent contributor. Okay, so you have all these people, and then the vicious side, Duryodhana, he is irresponsible and violent, just totally egoistic, violent person. Is hard force to achieve everything in life. He cannot think beyond hard force. It's just a big bully, which we will have all come across in our lives, I'm sure. Somebody who's so irresponsible, who just thinks of himself as narrow vision of life and cannot see beyond that. Then you have the spinster of them all, Shakuni, who is Duryodhana's mama or uncle, maternal uncle, who basically just twists him and poisons him and spins stories, and he is just a real nasty. He is the epitome of hard force, epitome of unconscious thinking, epitome of somebody who just plays dice at all. He just literally is a gambler with everything in life. Okay, so now I've only posed a few characters here, but you can see it's a study. Mahabharata is a study of all these human nature. We all have bits of this. In Mahabharata, when a character has been defined to be, let's say, giving and loving and friendly and compassionate, like Rama, he is the full extent of those qualities. We may have 10% of his qualities in us and 10% of Duryodhana and 15% of Arjuna. We are made up of these qualities in different proportions, but in Mahabharata, these characters define their personality to the fullest 100%. That's why they become very interesting to study, as if you were to study them psychologically, looking at their emotional structure, their mental structure, and what then that their character leads them to at the end of the war. Where does it all lead them to? So we can kind of correlate that if we were to emulate any one of these characters to more or less extent, that our end would be equivalent. So the win and the loss will be equivalent in our own life journeys. Now that brings me to Krishna. Who is Krishna? Krishna is the central theme, the kernel, the kind of, if you like, the nugget, the essence inside this story. And what I also noticed when I mentioned earlier that I noticed the exclusion of Vedic thought from media and academia, politicians and the corporate and the social world in the progressive lifestyle we find ourselves in, the idea of consciousness is always excluded in the recent history of our lives. Okay, whether you're looking at it scientifically or in any other way, the idea of consciousness just does not really exist. Now, the reason why I say this is that I've been party to a lot of individuals, been exposed to friends and, colleagues in the whole, global world from which I come as, as having worked in those arenas. If I ever brought up a conversation about consciousness, the people would just glaze over, like, what's that? We have no correlation in the English language fully that describes consciousness succinctly. It's one of those untranslatables from the Vedic tradition. Vedic tradition, the soft power has always been focused on consciousness, okay? It's my world, the subjective world, which is more powerful than the physical world, okay? The material world, which is the objective world. Now, even linguistically, the word subjective and objective is not really understood in the way we would expect people to understand it. Subjective is kind of loosely identifying consciousness, but it's more than that, okay? But in the West, we are very focused on the objective, what we can see, touch, and feel. In the Vedic culture, we are more focused on what we can't touch, see, and feel, which is the consciousness that is behind each eye, where we are all connected in oneness in that consciousness. And that is the unraveling that we need to do, really. We need to understand and experience that aspect of us, which is so subtle. It is at the subtlest level. So I always say, if you want to understand consciousness, if you can see it or think it or feel it, it's not it. So I can see myself, so that's not consciousness. It's beyond that. It is the very precept that cannot be seen, touched, felt, but it's the end point. So it cannot see itself. Okay? So that is what I mean by consciousness, and that whole thing is, that whole conversation is what the journey of seeking is all about, going back to understanding that you are at the most subtlest level, consciousness, and without which the material world cannot really exist, because you can't see it, you can't experience it. That's a big leap, but that's what Krishna is. Krishna is the consciousness. He has all these human attributes plus more. Okay, so all the people that you see in Mahabarata, he's all of that. He is Arjuna, he is Karna, he is Bhishma. He's everything and more. Now, the other thing about the war, the great war of Mahabharata, is one would think that it's very life negative and it's very, it's trying to portray the idea of war as the solution. But that is it's a very big misunderstanding, in my opinion, because embedded within the war, when Arjuna is at the midline of the war, he's neither on this side or that side, and he's sitting there with Krishna, i.e. consciousness, and he's saying, what shall I do? He kind of caves in. He has a depression. How can I fight this war? Okay, and that is the moment of truth, And at that point, we begin, or we all go through that journey inwardly when we just so kind of, we're confused, we're lost, we don't know what to do in an emotional situation. As I was saying earlier, even the people who love are hurting us. Even the people we hate are hurting us. We don't know which way to go. We're torn apart at this midline of the war. And that's where the story begins. And he goes inwards and goes to Krishna to get his solutions. And the solutions are not more war. The solutions are that he comes back with is actually pro-life. And it's actually, even though he has to fight this war, at the end of it, what he is really drawing from is the oneness. To stop all wars, only love can exist. And that sounds like an oxymoron, but I think the more you understand the story, the more you will realize that within a war, the message that is being perpetrated, peaceful life, pro-life, non-violent, ahimsa principles, soft power, adhered to at all times, be no need for a war. That is really the story. And it's so misinterpreted and so hijacked by the forces that want to keep it invisible and exclude this great body of work, because they know that soft power is where the power is. Okay? There's no Hindu or Vedic guru who would aspire to weapons, conversions, comparisons, fear, greed, all of these negative tendencies, because they aspired to be a soft power. Buddha was a soft power. He could have been a king. Buddha comes from the Vedic tradition. He was a king with great acclaim. He could have acquired the entire world if he wanted. He already had a huge span of the Southeast Asia as his territory. He became a soft power. He inspired. He wanted people to be inspired with love rather than be inspired by division and hate. That is the real power. That's where we all need to be heading, both in our everyday lives, our societal lives, our further wide lives. That's what we need to get to. Harmony rather than disharmony by divide. So I would say that the exclusions have been made very consciously by the powers to be, because by hard power, control can be kept of people, and soft power liberates people. Okay, it's very simple. Soft power, inspiration, will liberate and unite people. Hard power will divide and keep people under control. So one has to choose in that line that Arjuna finds himself in the midline, where the beautiful Bhagavad Gita, the song of God, is sung. He chooses very clearly that he wants to be on the soft power side, even though he's being asked to wage this war. He always had the intention, if you listen to the story carefully and clearly, always had the intention to unite and to be a soft power, but jealousy, greed, and lust became Duryodhana's delusion. And he chose the easy way out, which is hard power. I'm going to do it by force. It's almost laughable. It's so immature. There's no maturity in thinking. He tries to kill his own cousins several times. There's nothing mature about that. There's nothing to celebrate about that. Okay? Now, isn't it great that you can have such a body of work that you can draw from? You know, if you dived into it and really understood it without the conditioning of the media, the academia, the politicians, the corporates, the socials who kept it all from us, so that you can become powerful. Why wouldn't you want to do that? That's exactly what I did. When I started, I'll tell you a little side story. When my daughter was studying legal and political theory as a master's student at UCL in London, she was struggling a bit with political theory and philosophy. So we got her a tutor, the best professor we could find, who could tutor her at home. Okay. Now, this professor was clueless about Mahabharata. He had read, the greats, the Greek mythologies, Iliad and Odyssey, and he kept referring to, all the great philosophers, but excluded Veda Vyasa of the Vedic tradition. So I questioned him, why would you do that when we know in the British Library all the best literature is available, which was taken during colonization? I have a great friend who is head of British Library, and I have had the privilege to go and look at some of these Vedic works, whether it's Ramayana, Mahabharata, all taken from the times there, and they're in the coffers of British Library. I said, why would you exclude that body of work from you teaching political theory? I can say that the best political theory and social theory and legal theory can be found in Mahabharata, studying the Vidur Sastras. And he looked at me sort of blankly. Well, what's that? What's Mahabharata? And I said, well, you call yourself a great classic student and professor. I suggest you read the classics of the world without exclusion. So it's not just the Greek, classics that are of relevance, or you must include the world's classics before you can have the whole. Why would you, do a false allegation that you are positioning yourself as a whole when you have kept the whole, excluded a whole body of work? So he then did go and sort of looked it up. But the problem with looking up Mahabharata and the Gita, sometimes what people find is a very poor translation, and then they get put off because some of the language is untranslatable. So you must go to the right body of people to get the depth of that teaching. And unfortunately, that's not always easy. And I wasn't able to give him a good translation of Mahabharata, I must say, in English that I've picked up. But I did point him towards the series of videos, that I alluded to earlier. And I don't know if he watched it or not, but it was an interesting expose of the lack of knowledge in his professordom, or whatever you want to call it. There was a big hole or big exclusion. So now, what is the kernel within? Let's talk a little bit about what you will get if you go to the right teachers of Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita. What is the science of completion? Okay, that is the kernel, if you like, of Bhagavad Gita, the science of completion. Now, what is that completion? I was saying earlier that we have very, very distorted and fragmented versions of ourselves. The inner image of ourself is very different to the outer image we portray to the world. Okay, so internally, I may be really weak and fearful, but outwardly, I might say, oh, look how strong I am, and I'm so capable, and this, that there is a mismatch. Now, that mismatch is the conflict within. Okay, now Gita will teach you how to iron out that incompletion that stops you from being who you truly are and be able to go to your full potential version of you. Not just that, it's not just your inner view of yourself and your outer view of yourself, but you also have others' view of you. So when people see you as being fragmented, they will know that there is a fragmentation. So if you pose yourself as being all fearless and all goody-goody, and they will know, instinctively know that others' view of you will say, I don't really trust that person, they're not really complete. Huh? So Gita will teach you how to bring these fragmented versions of you into a whole so that you become a full mirror that can reflect fully the consciousness which we call Krishna, okay, or Krishna consciousness, so that you are ever powerful in all situations, meaning you are complete. Purna. Purna means nothing can be added to you, nothing can be taken away from you. That's a very powerful state that we should all be aspiring to. And that is the inner journey that Gita takes you to. And at the base, at the real root, subtlest level, it teaches you non-violence. It teaches you ahimsa. It teaches you non-stealing attitudes. It teaches you to unite. It teaches you to become whole with as an individual, in your society becoming whole, and universally, cosmologically becoming a whole. So it's that journey from being fragmented, broken, and in pieces, and being 100 different things to 100 different people, and becoming whole. Now, I went through something that was so painful when I divorced my first husband and had to speak my truth to the society and come out and just say, look, this is what's happened. This is who I am. This is my inner world, and I no longer want to hold it back. I want it part of my outer world. I want everybody to know who I am and to be loved for who I truly am, not for the version of person that you thought I was. And in so doing, there was so much pain, but there was also so much what the Vedic people would call moksha, or liberation. When those two identities became one, my outer image and my inner image, I experienced liberation. Liberation that I can't even begin to tell you what that feels like. Now, youngsters, if I was young, I'm sure a lot of you are young, I would really pray and beg you to work very hard on keeping your inner image and your outer image the same at all times, at all costs, to stop yourselves from getting into these delusions that then cause pain and suffering further down in your life. After, your glory years are over. I had great glory years and enjoyed all sorts of things, but then comes this pain. Oh my God, I've been an imposter to myself. I've denied myself. I've hated myself. And that's not a pretty picture, really, to end up in. So I really, if I can make one plea, I would say please work on that now, no matter what situation you find yourselves in. Because yes, you could be loving people and loving individuals, but they'll create you pain if those two images are not the same. If inwardly you are all confused and broken, and outwardly just to claim somebody's love, you're becoming something you're not, that will create enormous amounts of pain in the future, right? So I'm saving somebody, anybody, hopefully, from that pain early enough so that you can be who you are at all times, because that's when you will shine fully conscious and be conscious in everything that you do. Yeah. I think I've said enough. I have been talking now for 50 minutes or so, 40 minutes. Perhaps I can take some questions now. And at the next session, I would like to really dive into the Gita and say, how does it help us to correct these images, and delve deeper into the kind of the nuggets of what Krishna taught Arjuna on that war field, to become peace-loving, to become bliss, to always side with the right, to never be attached to outcomes. Those are all the nuggets that we will learn as we go along. So can I open up to some questions now? I understand you're able to post questions. Let me see if I can see something.
Thank you, Ragini, for that lovely conversation. Can we request anyone, if anyone has questions, to post it in the Post a Question channel? So yes, we have a question. What lessons can we learn from the Mahabharata to transcend suffering in our daily lives?
Yes, that's an interesting question, a good question, because that's exactly what Mahabharata is, kind of the pre-scene, okay, of how troubles are created, yeah, how the suffering is created. So first becoming aware of where these root patterns start is what Mahabharata teaches you. But then the actually, how do you transcend the suffering in your daily lives is kept in the Gita, which is embedded as a story within the story of Mahabharata, which basically teaches you how to unite all your broken identities and become one. Now, without going into all the details of what that may be, I suggest you come and listen to the next session, and then we'll dwell into what the techniques are to transcend suffering. So there are many tools you can adapt and adopt, because it's a very practical teaching. It takes you to an experience, but we're not going to be able to do it now in one sentence. We'll have to dig deep into the Gita to see if you can get an answer to the very profound question you ask.
Thank you. Another question. For example, 10 minutes ago, if my kid made a repetitive mistake, I use a strong tone to convey my thoughts. Is it reacting or responding?
Well, I would say that's reacting, because if you're using a strong tone, and what happens, okay, our children pick up root patterns at a very young age. So you've got to put yourself in the meta position. We call it meta position. You've got to step into your child's shoes and see how that is heard. Okay? So you may use a tone, but that tone contains meaning to the child. So you've almost got to become the child and hear yourself from that position and say, how is it being received? What root pattern am I helping this child develop? The root pattern in this instance could be, oh, my mother is very angry at me because her tone is high. That means, I have no self-worth. She doesn't love me. She's abandoning me, or whatever it may be. It could be any of those things. Now, those root patterns then become reinforced as time goes along. And that child will begin to see his entire world from that root pattern. Oh, I'm being abandoned. Oh, my mother didn't love me. Oh, I'm unlovable. Oh, and so that I would call reactive. Responding would be something slightly different. Maybe your technique would be, calming down first of all, because you need to be calm. You can't be speaking from the point of anger. And believe me, I've been here, so I fully understand. And I can't claim to be an expert because I'm not, because I react as well. I probably react more than you do. And it's the hardest thing to do, but it's becoming conscious during that aggression or during that moment and coming down to the level of the child and maybe saying, I don't like your behavior, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. Maybe just those words would stop that root pattern from being developed. Because as soon as the child takes on the idea he's not loved, then that's where the story, that he can hold that and use it as a filter with which he or she sees the world. But that's our journey as a mother, to try and understand that and try and see how our root patterns developed with our parents doing certain things. Becoming aware of that, and more you become aware of your own life journey, the more ability you will have to respond rather than react consciously.
Thank you. And as you said, Arjun was asked to exercise hard power, but it meant soft power. So bombing Japan by USA in World War was using hard power to establish soft power of peace. Sort of what's your view on that?
Okay. Soft power rather, never uses hard power in that sense. If it's going to, when all possibilities have been looked upon, okay, so you've gone through every single thing that you could do. In Arjun's case, he'd lost everything. He didn't even get, although all of the territory of Bharata belonged to the to the Pandavas, by everybody's claim. They weren't even given a postage stamp of land, okay? Even though they tried 100 times to try and get it. They got given land and then it was taken away. They developed something and then through jealousy was taken away, okay? Now, if everything is exhausted and you've got no other option, which is what we find ourselves in this story, everything is exhausted. The enemy had become such a nightmare, such a demon, such a bad force. You had no choice but to use aggression. At that point, Krishna is asking Arjuna to do his duty and do the right thing, okay, without attachment to the outcome, because he's about to go and kill his own family. Because at the end of the day, each war will always be killing your own family, because we're all brothers and sisters in that level of oneness that I spoke of, okay? Whenever you have a war, it's a fight with your own self. But have you exhausted everything? If you have, then you have no choice. I'm not a historian, so I cannot tell you whether the Allied forces exhausted everything before they dropped the Hiroshima bomb. I would like to think that they hadn't, because that's a self-destruct button, as I can see. Maybe it created a signal, but it also strengthened the hard power, in my view. So I think it's open to perception, that one. But I would have exhausted every other opportunity that was open to us, and then at the last hour, maybe go for that. And maybe the powers to be at that time felt that that was the only way. But what I've seen from that is that it has actually strengthened more weapons. It's strengthened hard power. It's strengthened more situations of war. It hasn't softened us. It hasn't united us. It hasn't taken us to enlightenment. So the verdict is still out. Was that good or bad? I would say that we've got no further forward 70 years on, or whatever it's been. We're in more of a devastation situation that we find ourselves in right now. So I hope that answers it. It's the best way I can answer it. And some may not like it, but that's my answer.
Thank you. And how does the elusive concept of consciousness relate to that of Numenon?
Of the?
Of Numenon. Yeah, I'm not sure if I got that right.
I don't know what that means. Sorry. Maybe.
Sure. We'll move on to the next question. Mahabharata shows us both sides of dharma and adharma, mostly through Yudhisthira and Duryodhana. How are the differences in your opinion?
Okay, so it's very simple. Duryodhana is only focused on me and mine. Okay? Those two keywords are his entire story of life. So he is focused on just him at all times. So every decision he takes, it's what will I get from it, this, it's all led by greed and fear, is Duryodhana. Yudhishthira, on the other hand, is representing dharma. He's looking for what is the best for the all. What is the right thing to do? What is the thing that I can do at this time that will not only obey social norms, but also cosmic norms? Okay? So, give you an example. Just destroying swathes of forest is not very good, is it? It's not focusing on cosmic norms. This year, I would like to argue, would consider strongly whether devastating forests was dharmic. He would consider that that is not dharmic, and probably would sway against it at all cost. So is more about us and ours rather than me and mine. It's a different focus. One is a unifying force and one is a divisive, dividing force. Duryodhana keeps us limited in our thinking, and Yudhishthira takes us to a more strong, more noble, more wider idea of thinking. So it is a struggle we face in our own selves. We've got two voices. The voice that says, I'm going to be adharmic today. I just want to have, alcohol, and, I just want to think about self-gratification, and I want to, I'm so agitated. I'm just going to, take, I just want to gratify myself by doing whatever I want, being led by my senses. That's one way of looking at it. Yudhishthira would probably give up all of those things, in order to remain conscious at all times. one is an unconscious mode of operation and another is conscious mode of operation. One is, led by sense gratification. Yudhishthira is not sense gratification. He will sacrifice his senses because it makes more sense for the whole. Okay, so I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. On the point of noumenon in the earlier question, a noumenon is a posited object or event that exists independently of human sense and or perception. Is used in contrast with or relation to the term phenomena. So yeah, going back to the earlier question, on that was how does the concept of consciousness relate to that phenomena of noumenon?
Okay, well, I haven't really got an answer to that. What I would like to do is understand the terminology and come back to you, because it's a Kantian philosophy. I can see that here, but it's not a philosophy that I've studied. I know my daughter has, and she will have a view on that, and I will consult it and come back to you. But all I can say is, there is a lot of distortions given, and if you dive deep enough, there is always a conclusion that consciousness is at the base of everything. And it may not be so easy to articulate in one sentence, but there will always be, because it's the deepest truth. So whatever else you throw at it can be negated by the correct articulation. But give me some time and I shall come back to you on that.
Sure, thank you. And how to connect with consciousness? I have visions and inner insights that seem to just show up without warning, and I've had trouble remaining open. What can I do?
There are so many masters. We are so blessed at this moment in time that will take us to the idea of consciousness. Okay, there's no one body, but the person who's doing incredible amounts of work here in Europe is a chap called Muji Baba, who gives you a direct experience of consciousness very quickly. I'm not saying he solves all the problems, because I have been in his masterdom and tasted and understood his concept of consciousness. There is stuff, consciousness is always expanding and always growing in terms of a concept or in terms of our understanding of it. So no one person can give you the full, I hope you understand. It's like the universe. Universe is always expanding, yes, and always growing. And consciousness is the same. You cannot take it from one master. You've got to kind of get an idea of it through continual seeking and continuous experience of it. The best way to experience consciousness is to sit in silence, not to meditate, not to do anything, but to keep saying, if I can observe it, it's not it. If I can observe it, it's not it. Have I stopped observing it? That is it. And then resting in that space, which is unmovable, which is omniscient, omnipresent. You get that concept. Some will call it void. Some will call it the gap between the thought. Some will call it whatever they want to call it. The God particle. However, it's just sheer silence when there is no movement, there is no thought, there is nothing. But in that nothing is everything. Okay? And it's just, we will all have different interpretation and experience of it. So my experience will be very different to somebody else's, because it's forever expanding and it's always perceived in different ways, because we are limited. We're trying to Consciousness is absolute, the infinite, and we're trying to view it with the finite. It's almost like an impossibility, isn't it? So, but you get glimpses of it and you get experiences of it, and some people can remain in that consciousness forever. Some of us dip in and out. I think I dip in and out, when I am very silent. I'm not really meditating because I don't do that. I'm just silent. I'm not thinking. I don't know how to describe that. And I'm not moving and I'm not agitated. There's nothing, basically. There is everything in that silence. So you've got to try and kind of develop a taste for it and a time for it and energy for it. And there are so many masters that teach you. My guru teaches me many, many ways to do it. And he's phenomenal. But he's not everybody's cup of tea. And I wouldn't want to get into an argument. The guru has to come to you, and whatever level you're at, you will find the right teacher that will resonate with you, that will take you to this phenomena that we call consciousness, from which all power is derived, all physical is derived, everything is derived from that space. And you become a manifester. And I've got stories that I can relate. You live in synchronicity, you live in bliss, you live in moments of conscious action. Even if you're cutting a tomato, you're conscious of it. You have more and more moments of no thought, just acting through, dancing through things, flowing. I don't know, there's so many words, aren't there? But it's an experience that's so private, so personal, so real that you can't deny it, you can't contest it.
Thank you for that. And just last question now. So as another question, my favorite character in the Mahabarata is Bhisma Pitamaha. How do you see his character? And on his deathbed, he gave great advices to on kingship to Yudhishthir. How do you see his advices?
Now, Bhishma, as my guru would say, he was remarkable, and basically he was only one fault away from being Krishna. Okay, so he was nearly the whole, what we call Krishna consciousness, the complete. But he had, without him, there would have been no story. Bhishma Pita was a remarkable, it's a cosmological being who had a boon, who was the son of Ganges. Now, most of us won't understand all of these, what we call mythology, but it's not mythology, it's cosmology. It's the silent nature, of the universe. But Bhishma at the end is basically advising Yudhishthira. He gives him the Vishnu Sahasranama, the mantras that we sing today, which basically, Bhishma always knew that Krishna was the Lord, okay? But he was on the earth plane to basically be so sided with, with the conditioning of nature. He had to demonstrate those qualities, and he took a part. But he was from a cosmic birth. He came from cosmic nature that we don't understand. But a divine being. He was only one step away from Krishna, even though he fought on the other side. This is why Bhagavad Gita is just so incredible. Mahabarata, there is, there's almost, opposites being demonstrated, and everything is sort of, how can I say it, turbulent and yet not turbulent. It's it goes beyond the opposites, Advaita. Okay, and Bhishma Pitta allows us to recognize that Advaita state in his last song as he's lying on the deathbed with all his arrows, pierced. He's killed by Arjuna, by the war. Not Arjuna, but it's another character which we won't go into, which is also karmically linked. It's a woman, in fact, because he has a boon that he cannot be killed by a male body. But it's perfection in the imperfect. The demonstration of all these contradiction of terms, because we are living contradiction of terms, and we've got to ascend those contradictions. And Bhishma Pitta beautifully shows that, towards the end, a beautiful story which you must, you can't eat this story in piece parts. You've got to eat it whole to really enjoy it. Because if I tell you little nuggets, it doesn't mean anything, okay? You have to have the time and resources to really sit down and give it your all. And then you would become authentic and say you know Mahabarata. I watched it twice and I'm still not authentic and say I know about Mahabarata. That's how deep it is. So, yeah, I hope that answers that one.
Thank you for that, and thank you so much for such a beautiful session. I think everyone here has really enjoyed it. Me, thank you so much for your time, and very much look forward to your next session.
Thank you for inviting me, and I hope everybody got something out of it. Thoroughly enjoyed being here with you. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much.